All right, welcome in. It is GC Live Friday episode. Hope y'all had a great Thanksgiving. He is Chris Clark. I'm Wes Mitchell. We are live from BP Skinner here in the Vista. Still a little bit of time if you're in the area to come on and do some Black Friday shopping here. And if you're going to the game tomorrow, maybe get you something for the game. Or if you're just be sitting around watching the game and want to dress up a little bit, come on by as well for that. Christmas presents, gift cards, all that, of course, as well. So come see us here. If you miss us, come by some other time. Also, as always, we're presented by our guy, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans as well. ClintHammond.com, 803-422-6797, NMLS number 71597. Chris, 24 hours from right now, as we are live, as we are recording, if you're listening to this later on, South Carolina and Clemson will be about halftime or so, maybe starting the third quarter, depending on how this thing kicks off. So for all intents and purposes, we have made it. Like, we're almost there. These are the final remaining thoughts on South Carolina versus Clemson. So, forever hold your peace, man. If you don't say it right now, you don't get an opportunity. Where is our head at right now going into this thing as we start to dive into South Carolina versus Clemson, the 121st meeting between the two programs?
This is a big one, Wes. I mean, it always is. We were talking about that this morning. If these two teams were 1-10 going into this game, would there be quite as much excitement? Probably not, but it would still be a very meaningful game because of the long history of this rivalry, right? But both teams are not. Both teams have had good years. Both teams are on the doorstep of being able to maybe backdoor into the college football playoff. And so in order to do that, in order to make that a conversation, and it has been a conversation. Remember last time we flipped on the rankings on Tuesday, the rankings show, they're sitting there going through some scenarios. They pop up the graphic. You brought this up, Clemson, Carolina, right? So it became, I think that just crystallized for both teams. This isn't just something we're talking about in our own little bubble. Like, this is a reality. The computers show it. You're in striking distance with Clemson being 12, Carolina being 15. Either of these teams is going to have an ability to get a quality win this regular season finale as well. So if you can do that, you're in striking distance. So you've got the rivalry, you got bragging rights. That's already huge. But you also have the opportunity to close out your regular season with a huge win and keep your name in that conversation and give yourself some additional ammo as well.
Yeah, I feel like when you saw that graphic pop up, or when they were playing that sort of promotional video and you saw South Carolina, I think, running out to 2001, I think there was a shot of Debo in there as well. That to me made it real. That's when I was like, all right, this is not just something we're talking about. This is something national guys are talking about. You got Booger McFarland sitting there saying, hey, South Carolina is the hottest team in the country. And, you are playing right now, as you said, not just for bragging rights, but you're playing, I think, for an opportunity to kind of change the way people see the rivalry right now. For so long, Clemson has, frankly, owned this rivalry. And so South Carolina breaks through 2 years ago, finds a way to win in Clemson, ends their streak up there. And, I think that was probably very tough for Clemson fans to swallow, the way that thing went.
Yeah.
I mean, crazy, insane game. Had a ton of different shifts and just like momentum shifts, turnovers. And then it almost in the fourth quarter came screeching to a halt. And it was like, all right, can one team score one more time? And Carolina got several stops, or Clemson fans would say, well, we shot ourselves in the foot with turnovers. So depending on your perspective, you probably look at that game differently. But you go into this one, man, two, at least according to Vegas, very tight teams. I still am kind of a little bit just trying to process that Vegas line. Like, to me, on paper, if these two teams were at a neutral site and you just said, this game is not going to get drunk. Like, the game 2 years ago got drunk, and just when that happens, anything can happen.
Yep.
If they just lined it up with equal turnovers or no turnovers, I do think on paper South Carolina should have the edge in this game. A lot of it to me is based on some of the things that Clemson has done versus lesser opponents compared to when they've played a Georgia, when they've played a Louisville. By the way, Louisville, I think that's the game I most watched.
Yep.
In terms of maybe what can we learn about Clemson? What can we learn about the matchup from watching how they attacked Clemson? And then, of course, Pitt, a game here recently where Clemson needs a late run from Cade Klubnik to go win the game. So to me, I think it's one of those things on paper. Yes, South Carolina has the edge, but it is a rivalry. It's at Clemson. You do have a young quarterback in Lenore Sellers who's going to be kind of introed into this thing. And when Vegas has them as that slight favorite, I do not take that lightly because, as we know, Vegas knows.
They do know, and that has caught my attention as well. And it's been interesting that, if you kind of look at some of the other metrics, a lot of the computer models, all the ones I've seen favor Clemson as well. I was reading Bill Connolly, his SP Plus, kind of his weekend predictions on ESPN, predictions from the standpoint of here's what the computers say, but also just analyzing, hey, who could play their way into the playoff this weekend? Who could play their way out of the playoff this weekend? And I know the SP Plus had it at like 0.9 points for Clemson, right? So very, very close. So I think whether you're looking at Vegas, whether you're looking at a computer model, even if you're just kind of eyeballing this one, I come down to the fact, Wes, that it seems like the expectation should be that this is a close game one way or another. Like you said, if it gets off the rails, anything could happen. But I think these are a couple teams that in some way or another are pretty evenly matched because some of the teams, one team's strengths, the other team's weakness, or vice versa.
Yeah, if you just look at the stats, I mean, this is a very good Clemson team. Now, I do think once you dive in there a little bit more to the opponents and just sort of isolate what have they done against these type of opponents versus other types of opponents, you do get maybe a little bit more of a clear story. But if you just go, I always use cfbstats.com, type in, click ACC, and then, Clemson's still very much at the top. If you say, hey, scoring offense, scoring defense, stuff like that. Something that catches my attention, though, Chris, middle of the pack, even with the lighter schedule, middle of the pack in terms of rushing defense for Clemson. Yeah, so to me, and I think this is true for either side. It's true for every football game, but definitely this one. Which side is able to truly establish the run? And not just like, I think we know Sellers will break off a couple of runs and, Klubnik will probably at some point do the same, but which side early on can truly actually get their running back going? Because you have, I would say, two backs that do have a little bit similar style. Maffa for Clemson, big dude, physical. He is pretty much, other than the quarterback run, he is their running game.
Yes.
For Clemson. Rocket Sanders, Carolina's mixed in some other guys a little bit more than Clemson, but Rocket is a difference maker. So which team can get that guy going is going to be a factor. Again, on paper, I think you like South Carolina's chances of doing that. As we've talked about, though, maybe my expectations got skewed a little bit too high. I thought Carolina would have run the ball a little bit better the last 2 weeks, just in terms of handing the ball off and getting your running back going. If you look at the numbers, you'll say, well, Carolina rushed for 285 yards when you take out the sacks last week. That's nothing to ever be upset about.
Sure.
But Missouri didn't have a great run defense coming in necessarily. And, the running game in that game was a little bit iffy. Carolina got stopped on some short yardage, as we know. So I think, what are we talking about after the first quarter of this game? Has it settled in? Are we going, oh, this is going to be a weird game like 2 years ago? Is this just going to be a slog fest, basically, where both sides are trying to run the ball? I don't know, but I think we will start to have a pretty good idea of where this thing is headed based on those first 15 minutes.
It's a great point about Clemson's run defense. I don't want to give the impression that this is not a Clemson defense that has talent and has ability. They do. This is still a good defense overall, but they do have some warts. This is not the defensive line, for instance, that we have seen from Clemson in the past few years, even the linebacking core. They're not quite as strong up front. And that's been a big topic of discussion in the upstate is the run defense. You look at, one thing, they blasted the Citadel, right? But if you kind of really dive in there, they gave up 200-something rushing yards to the Citadel. Then you could say counterpoint, that was the option. Mm-hmm. South Carolina's not going to come in running triple option in that. But South Carolina will run some triple option plays and concepts administered in a different way within their offense. You look at that Louisville game, Wes, that you mentioned. That's one where I'm sure South Carolina is diving in heavily going, all right, what did Louisville do that caused Clemson so many problems? Wes, they rushed for 7.8 yards a carry, Louisville did in that game. And Clemson lost by multiple scores, right? That was a big reason for it. So I think you go back and look at, we'll probably see some things that have given Clemson trouble. South Carolina will try to implement them, but no doubt, I think Clemson's got to be worried about Rocket Sanders and Lenora Sellers, that combination. South Carolina has to be keyed into the fact that they're going to have to run the ball and do it more effectively than they did against Missouri.
Yeah, now I'm sure Clemson has also had a chance to dive into that Louisville game, and they've tried to shore up any mistakes they had from that one. But if that is your blueprint, Louisville, to me, actually did some things, and we're not talking about reinventing the wheel here, that they're just doing crazy different, run schemes that nobody else uses. A lot of it, though, is similar to what we see from South Carolina. It's a mix of inside zone. It's a mix of a gap scheme where you're talking about pulling different offensive linemen out onto the edge. I thought, from what I saw looking back at that game, Louisville did a really good job of mixing things up just enough. But when they got guys on the edge, that's where the room was. They hit a long run, Chris Bell for a 47-yarder off of a reverse play. So they were doing just enough. They hit a long. It's not a run technically, but they hit a long running back screen. That's something we've seen South Carolina have a little bit more, actually a lot more success with the last few weeks compared to really the Beamer tenure to this point. So they were able to mix things up just enough, not necessarily in your super complex passing concepts, all this other stuff, but just mixing up the running game enough to find room. And I think it is noteworthy. You mentioned how good Louisville was on the ground in that game. Isaac Brown, 20 carries, 151 yards, 7.6 yards per carry for him alone.
Yeah.
When your running back is getting that yardage, that to me is a little less flukish than sometimes just like, I'm sure some teams' run defenses have been made to look really bad this year just because Sellers has just done so much for Carolina. And, you look at the Pitt game for Clemson 2 weeks ago. How much did those numbers maybe get skewed a little bit by Klubnik taking off for a long run at the very end that at least kind of won the game for Clemson and maybe skewed your run game a little bit more because Pitt pretty much just shut them down.
Right.
Otherwise, Tyler Head earlier bringing up 17 carries for 17 yards for Phil Maffa in that game. So, I go back and forth here, Chris, because on paper, I kind of like South Carolina's chances both in establishing the run and in slowing down Clemson's rushing attack as well. But there's that little just reminder in the back of my head. These games aren't played on paper.
That's right.
This is a rivalry matchup. And I can't see Clemson. Clemson's not going to lay down. They're not going to let South Carolina just step into their house and bully them around, in my opinion. Like that, you're going to kind of like you had to go through the fire to finally beat Missouri. And that ended up being way more just insane than anybody probably wanted it to be. Is there a world where South Carolina just controls this thing and just kicks the door down and says, hey, we're taking control of this rivalry? Maybe so. That's your best case scenario. But is there also a world where this thing is just another game, much like 2 years ago, where Clemson is down for the battle and we get another classic?
Well, I think that's what you lean towards because not only of this being a rivalry game, Wes, but I just think, even if you're a pretty confident Gamecock fan, I don't think you're sitting there going, we're 30 points better on paper. That's kind of silly to me, right? Plus, we're in the year 2024. College football week to week, incredibly hard to predict. And I think, but you're going to get the best shot from both these teams. At the end of the day, it's which team plays better. It's going to come down to, probably a handful of explosive plays or explosive play opportunities, whether or not you make them. It's going to come down to establishing the run and being more physical. It's going to come down to, I think, turnovers. And, one of the aspects, by the way, to that we should mention related to Clemson's run game, related to Cade Klubnik, who is very good, using his legs to extend plays, keep his eyes downfield. He's really grown in that aspect. Design runs, scrambles, he can do all that. Clemson's offensive line and Phil Maffa, their running back, the health of both of all those guys, right? Maffa, we know, we were talking to Larry Williams on the game today on the radio, had a shoulder problem that's, limited him. Their offensive line Had another guy go down this week who won't play in the game, who's been a reserve, stepping in for some other guys that have also been banged up. The left side of their offensive line has really been hit hard by injuries with a couple of starters out. They've had to play musical chairs there. That's really seemed to affect their offense. It does look like they're going to get at least one of those guys back tomorrow. Their left tackle, their left guard, seems like their tackle is going to play. Maybe the guard. Are they 100%? Probably not. How, but Wes, you look at that. Gamecocks defensive line. It's probably the best group Clemson's seen. Clemson has played Georgia. They played Pitt. They played Virginia Tech, Louisville. Those are probably the best 4 defenses they've played. The opposing defense in those games has had some success in rushing the passer too against Cade Klubnik. I think 9 sacks in the Pitt and Virginia Tech game. So pass rush and being able to control the front for South Carolina against a banged up Clemson offense.
Well, and how much does, I didn't necessarily realize this, but there's a lot of moving parts to, like, even when they're getting guys back, because they had to shuffle.
Yeah.
And we saw this. We saw this right down the road last year.
Oh, yeah.
Guys go down. What do you have to do? You have to shuffle. You have to shuffle around. And so Carolina had to, well, hey, we got to get, this is our next best guy. Let's get them in. Clemson was doing the same thing. Well, now you're almost, hey, we got this guy back. Get your left tackle back, but you almost have to reshuffle. Well, we move that guy to left tackle. He goes back to right tackle. The right tackle goes back to guard. That's a position. How much we talked about continuity and the importance of continuity on the O-line. Well, if you're Clemson, you got some of your guys back. That's the guys you want on the field. But like you said, how close to 100%? Are they rusty? This is not a defensive line you want to be sort of getting accustomed to playing against. And then can you have a couple of maybe blown assignments if you're South Carolina, or create a couple of those for Clemson? We've seen Clayton White kind of go into the goodie bag a little bit more this year in terms of being a little bit more exotic on third downs. And so can you create some busts where it's not just a physical win, but that they're just a little iffy playing beside each other that creates opportunities? I think we have seen Clemson at the quarterback position get better than last year. This is not the Clemson offense that just did not score offensively in Columbia last year. So give them credit for that. Like, I think they're better at receiver. Bringstone, the tight end, he's good. Klubnik has cut down on kind of they're boneheaded mistakes, really. Yeah. I think at times, Chris, they have gone a little bit too far into like, hey, just check the ball down. He looks to me like he has been programmed the second you see that it's not there to dump the ball off. Against better defenses, then you kind of lose your explosiveness a little bit when you do that. So to me, Carolina, if they're going to just short pass, you got to be able to tackle. We know that, tackle in the perimeter. But if you can get them, and this goes back to stopping the run, if you get them into those third downs, I think a key is, can you make him revert back? Can you make him feel the pressure, not just pass rush pressure, but game pressure, moment pressure, to feel like he has to go make stuff happen? And that, to me, may be one of the 2 or 3 biggest keys in this entire game for both quarterbacks, because we know Sellers is dynamic. Yeah. And he has a chance to start to build his legacy. Like, if you go down to Clemson and win the game and play great, like we know he can, you start to kind of etch another spot in kind of your legacy at South Carolina. So both sides are going to be hoping and trying to put their quarterback in position to go do that. Who can walk that line to do it without turning the football over with 2 guys that, frankly, have had those things be a problem at times in their careers?
The fascinating thing for me, and really you could apply this to either team against either quarterback, either defense against either quarterback, because, Sellers and Klubnik aren't the same player, but they have similarities in terms of being able to, they are at their best when things break down at times. Dow Loggins, saying on the headset, making the joke, and this came out, from, I think, Shane Beamer, right? Hey, maybe we should just call a play where we let pressure get there, and he makes everybody miss, and then we make something happen. Klubnik this year and Shane Beamer had kind of a library in his head of, he made this play, he made this play, he made this play. What's going to be fascinating to me is, given what you said about Clayton White, You want to be aggressive. You'd love to go out there and rush 4 and just wreck shop. That'll be an easy day, easier if you can do that. But when you do bring pressure, just kind of the tension between bringing pressure, playing with your hair on fire versus keeping Klubnik caged in. Because if you do let him escape, he can make explosive plays on you. And Clemson, their defense, they're having the same conversation right now. So that'll be an interesting kind of game within the game.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see Carolina's speed on defense against Klubnik in that if he does escape a little bit, do we see those kind of windows just get shut down very, very quickly because they are facing a very fast South Carolina defense. All right, we got a special guest joining us here today. Here's our boy Mike Uva, who, of course, South Carolina, Clemson. Mike just wanted to be involved because he's excited about this game like all of us. And, Mike, you got the day off up there, man. You wanted to talk to the people, and we are happy to have you because, dude, I mean, I know you've gotten into this rivalry too. You've been following it just like we have. And I don't know if there's been a more exciting just sort of build up to a game between South Carolina and Clemson in a long, long time, maybe ever. How are you feeling about this thing, Mike?
Do you guys like my crappy green screen, trying to bring it back like old time's sake? So, I'm actually not obviously in South Carolina, but felt like we'd make it feel like the old GC Live show. So if my head gets cut off, I'm not great with this green screen crap. No, this is awesome. This is really neat. It's really cool. And I think, I've said this to you guys before, but it's cool when you're in a part of the country like this where people don't follow college football the same. And then throughout the course of the year, you have people coming up to me that, I deal with covering the Patriots. You're like, man, what's going on in South Carolina? What's going on with Beamer? And then you have more people excited about it. And, we're also trying to push some subscriptions up here too to some of these reporters. I don't know if that's working, but we'll see what we can do. Try to push that $1 special deal. But no, it's great. It shows that this is a rivalry, of course, in that state. As an outsider, when I got there a couple of years ago, almost 10 years ago, I knew nothing about it. And then you get there and you realize quickly how important it is to the state. And when you have a game of this magnitude with the fact that both these teams are ranked top 15, it makes it that much more special. So everything just leading up to the hype. I mean, I just want it to be Saturday already. I'm just ready for noon kickoff. Let's go, baby.
Mike, I know you wrote something on Gamecock Central this morning and been talking to some people, close to the program about kind of the vibe, right? And that always comes up with these rivalry games where, what is the mindset? What is the psyche of both teams? What have you gathered on the South Carolina front as far as how people are feeling right now?
Yeah, I put something out there today on Gamecock Central, just, from talking to some of the players inside the building. And the biggest thing is they're trying to just make sure, as cliche as it sounds, they're trying to make sure that they don't treat this game any bigger than what they've treated it over the last couple of weeks. And there was one quote in particular that really stood out to me, and I'll read it. And again, you can see the full story on Gamecock Central if you're a subscriber, is that they're talking about the fact, I'm trying to pull it up right now in front of me. They're talking about the fact that when you have a game like this, the last thing that we want to do is put more pressure on ourselves than there already is. If there's anything that I've learned with playing in this series, it's that you need to control your emotions because it's real easy to get caught up in all the hype. That's a message we've been letting the younger players as well as the newer guys know when you're playing in a game like this against Clemson. So look, I get it. I'm sure this fan base, they want to hear their players say, okay, we hate Clemson for X, Y, Z, and I totally get it. But at the same time, too, I agree with what the players that I spoke with throughout the week, that they're trying to stay level-headed, that they're not trying to treat the situation any bigger than it already is. Because guess what? If they lose on Saturday, none of that matters. None of that matters. And as we know, if you win this game outside of everything that's potentially on the line with the college football playoff, you have bragging rights in this state for the next 365 days. And you guys know it better than anybody because you're on top of it when it comes to recruiting, how big this can continue to carry that momentum. I mean, I think back to when I was in Mississippi, and I agree with what Hugh Freeze once said, which was a rivalry game might not necessarily dictate what a player ultimately does from a recruiting standpoint. Like, okay, hey, you know what? South Carolina won. I'm going to go there over Clemson. But when you continue to stack what South Carolina has done over the last couple of years, and you're able to win 2 out of the last 3 in this rivalry, if they're able to take care of business on Saturday, you start to look at things saying, okay, what's going on in Columbia? And from a recruiting standpoint, that's when you start to see everything continue to shift. It doesn't happen overnight, as you guys know, but I think it certainly can't hurt, especially with what South Carolina wants to do, which is win the in-state battle when it comes to recruiting and continue to expand, whether go create pipelines in the DMV area of Florida or wherever the case may be.
And Mike, to that same point, man, obviously, these are athletes. They're going to compete. They're going to be competitive. But at some point, maybe every athlete has a different point where the pressure starts to get to them. But I feel like every athlete had, maybe for some of them, it's like they're in the Super Bowl and that's the first time in their life they've been nervous. But to me, this game, not so much just also about the, hating Clemson versus not hating Clemson. If you let yourself start thinking about college football playoff, hey, what's it going to mean if we lose this game? What's it going to mean if we win this game? Hey, this next play is the most important play of the entire season. You start thinking about all those things. That's when you kind of lose a little bit of that competitive edge. You kind of lose the ability to just go play and play free. So I tend to think whichever team, like Beamer and those guys, they talk about being fireproof, and that's kind of their motto on the sideline. Which of these teams can just come out and go be themselves and just play the game and do what they have been taught and coached to do all season long is going to have a very distinct advantage, in my opinion. The team that gets caught up in all the talk and everything else involving the ramifications of winning, the ramifications of losing, all those different things is going to play to the pressure of the moment, and that will probably not be good.
Yeah, and I think when you look back over the last, I'd say, 8-9 years or so, it's obviously been a one-sided rivalry. It feels like from a Clemson standpoint over the last couple of years, they really haven't gone into this game worried about South Carolina, right? They just looked at it as, all right, hey, look how good we've been from a national standpoint. We're just going to go out there. We're going to handle our business. From talking to people on the other side of things, Clemson is looking at this game much differently in comparison to even where things were, say, 2 years ago. I mean, I've talked to some former players who were on that Clemson team in 2022, and they told me point blank, we didn't take South Carolina as seriously as we probably should have. Things are much different now. Having said that, for South Carolina, it's one thing. Like, again, there's another quote that from this story, and I really like this one. We just got to keep doing what we've been doing because we're looking at it as we've been in the playoffs for half the season now, right? Like the last half of the season has essentially been a playoff game for South Carolina, because if they had lost one of these games, whether it be against Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Missouri, whoever the case may be, season would have been over. Now, certainly they're still on the outside looking in. They need to handle their own business on Saturday. They probably need to get some help from a game or two from a team that's ranked right now inside that top 11. But that's how you have to treat it is, hey, look, you know what? We play some of the best teams in the country. This will be the 7th team that South Carolina has played this year that's ranked, I believe. They've had plenty of experiences of going up against some good teams. Obviously, the environment on Saturday, yeah, we know what the magnitude is. We know what the stakes are. We know what it means to the state. But you can't get caught up in that mindset, as you mentioned, Wes, because when you do those things, you start to play a little bit slower, and that's when bad things happen. And I mentioned this earlier in the week on Gamecock Central. I mean, there's so many crazy stats that you can look at. One in particular that really just stands out to me: Clemson 9-0 when they don't force a takeaway. When they do force it, 9-0 when they force a takeaway. When they don't, they're 0-2. So there's another reason why South Carolina needs to protect the football this weekend. Don't give Clemson the ball. And oh, by the way, when they do, Clemson usually scores 75% of the time right after they have a takeaway.
That's a good stat there, Mike, and leads me actually to my next question. That may be one of your keys to the game, but we've kind of taken a high-level overview into, mindset and some of the things that are going to be important from an emotional, from a mental standpoint. But once the ball's kicked, it's going to come down to which team plays the best, right? And that obviously focus has a lot to do with that. But blocking, tackling, running, catching the football, making good decisions. What are your keys to the game if you could kind of narrow it down to just a few?
Yeah, I put a couple out on Gamecock Central, so if anyone wants to take like a deeper look at it, we do it every Thursday. Obviously, as I mentioned right there, right? I mean, got to protect the football. I mean, that's been something that, as we've seen throughout the course of the season, South Carolina has been better at times, even though despite last week, you had that interception early from Lenoris. He did a good job of them protecting the football after that. I think the other thing, too, and some of it does sound cliche, but it's open field tackling. Clemson does a lot of, they like to really establish the run. They mix in some play action. RPOs are there as well, but they get the ball out quickly. And as we saw earlier in the year, it was especially as the game went on against LSU. LSU did a phenomenal job of establishing the run and then getting the ball out quickly. And South Carolina really struggled. And that was the game that South Carolina missed more tackles than any other game this season. 17 missed tackles right there. Almost nearly 20% of South Carolina's missed tackles this year came from that one game alone. And then, Vanderbilt, they try to do some of the same things that you'll see to an extent, a little bit more window dressing with the motions with Vanderbilt. But South Carolina did a much better job of stopping the run between the tackles and then obviously rallying to the football on the perimeter and being able to, complete those open field tackles. So Clemson's a team that has had a lot of success on the perimeter this year, especially when it comes to third downs. They're one of the better teams in the country when it comes to picking up third down conversions. It's doing those little things. Again, it sounds so cliche, but get off the field on third down, make sure you tackle. And the last one too, is, it just can't be Sellers. I think what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, people say, man, Sellers, it starts with him. No question about it, starts with him. But you need other players to step up. You need the offensive line to do maybe a little bit better job. Maybe some of those sack statistics look a little prettier for them. And not trying to take anything away from them, but at the same time, too, you got Superman, as Tori Gurley told me earlier in the week, behind at center, and he's able to extend some of those plays. Offensive line needs to have their best game of the year. Wide receivers, they need to continue to do what they've been doing the last couple of weeks. And hopefully you have one of those Rocket Sanders game where it comes fourth quarter, he's able to continue just to wear defenses down. It needs to be a complete team effort. It can't just be Lenore's this weekend.
Yeah, no, you mentioned the perimeter stuff, Mike. I think that's definitely in the top three for me as well, just tackling those guys out there, because it really does not feel like a downfield passing offense for Clemson. Like any team, they're going to try to stretch you vertically, and I'm sure they will take some shots, but really it just doesn't feel like that's what they do, especially against the better defenses that they have faced. And, I think all those things you're talking about will be the difference in, can you get them in those kind of 3rd and 7 or longers versus are they going to be in 3rd and 3 or less where they're going to feel really good about converting those things. And I think Klubnik has worked so hard, you can tell, to try to protect the football better this year, that if you can get him in those 3rd and long situations with their kind of injury issues on the offensive line and what we know about Carolina's pass rush, maybe you then are able to pin your ears back, get pressure on him, and potentially not just protect the football on your end, but force him kind of to regress a little bit to some of those issues he's had before this year. And I think that will be a massive key for Carolina, because you bring up that LSU game. I thought that Nussmeier did as good a job as anybody Carolina's faced at delivering the football when he knew he was going to get hit. Like how many passes did that guy complete where we're talking a millisecond between a downfield first down versus a sack, or at the very least an incomplete pass. And the second half, like he had there were times where there's no way he saw his receiver. He just trusted he was going to be there and delivered the ball. And I gave him a ton of credit for that. Can Klubnik do the same or not? I think will be a factor in this game as well. Mike, before we let you get out of here, man, give us your final thoughts and what's your score prediction?
Well, I think going back to just your point real quickly, that's one of the ways you take away South Carolina's biggest strength when it comes to their defense, which is you're able to get the ball out quickly and you slow down and you essentially eliminate that pass rush. That's what LSU was able to do. There's no question that we all know what the strength is of the South Carolina defense. They're able to put pressure, and it's not just the edges. It's what they do from an interior standpoint. We've even seen guys like Martin Scott and some of the linebackers fly around the last couple of weeks. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. I really do. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. It might not be the sexiest of games in terms of the flow of it, but that's all right. I think if anything, again, South Carolina really needs to be able to capitalize when they have their opportunities down in the red zone. This is a Clemson defense that for the last couple of years, even though the faces changed, they're still stingy. They're still a stingy defense. I want to make sure I had my score prediction right, because I sent it to Jack. I want to make sure I have it the same way, because me with numbers, I'm not great when it comes to that stuff. So I'm trying to pull it up right now. My score prediction for this one, I have South Carolina winning 20-17. So again, I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. That would give you the under for those of you who are interested in that stuff. But I think it's going to be one of those games where, again, someone needs to make a play, whether it's going to be on special teams, whether it be on defense. Marcellus Dial and I were talking about it the other day, and he still smiles just thinking about picking off TJ Uyunglele. So someone needs to step up. Is it going to be Judge Collier this week? I mean, who knows? Everyone's been talking about Nick Eamon-Worry, who was snubbed this week from not being on the Jim Thorpe list. Could he make a big play this week? Who knows? I mean, that's DJ Swearinger. We know him because of a lot of the plays that he did throughout his career, but especially with what he was able to do in the Clemson rivalry. So who knows? I mean, Nate Atkins, right? Nate Atkins will be remembered forever in Columbia because of those 2 plays, but especially that one big catch. So this is where legends are truly made. As corny as that sounds, it's the God's honest truth. Just walk into half of the bars in Columbia and restaurants. I mean, Steve Tannehill's pictures all over the place. So maybe we'll have a guy that, has done some good things this week, but he does something absolutely incredible this weekend, and he's going to be remembered forever in Columbia.
Yeah, and I think that's you just summed up, Mike, what makes rivalry special. It's an opportunity for everybody on that field, whether you are the number one superstar that everybody's talking about, or you're the last guy who's played the smallest amount of snaps this year, but you find a way. I mean, we've seen Carolina have guys go in and have to go play. I mean, Peyton Williams earlier this year, he goes from not really playing to he's on the field in a big game. So you never know who that's going to come down to, and that's really what college football is all about. By the way, Steve, speaking of those staff picks, Mike, what's your record on there this year, bud?
Well, you know what? As the 2-time defending champ, it's tough to three-peat. It's tough to three-peat. It hasn't been a good year for me in anything, whether it be NFL, college, having a little skin in the game on some of these games. I mean, put it this way. This sums up just how my picks have been just in general this year, just in anything. I picked BYU to win straight up a couple weeks ago, and I lose on a pooch punt from a quarterback that hits off the helmet of a defensive back, and they recover it, and Kansas wins the game by 4. So that just sums up my picks this year. I'm still in the hunt. I'm not going to take any shots at my colleagues, but Wes is having one of the better years. It's all right, but we need to have a heck of a weekend this weekend. But I would love just to see nothing more than South Carolina beat Clemson. And, oh, by the way, I did let the Reno family know this year I picked Yale, and that some of the GC staffers did not believe in the Bulldogs this year. I was on the other side of it last year. Hand up, accountability. This year, though, I took Yale, and they took down Harvard. So, just want to let you know the Reno family might not be sending some Christmas cards to South Carolina this year to some GC staffers.
Well, I believe I picked against them 2 years in a row now, Mike. So I'm effectively called out here.
Maybe you need to keep it going then. Maybe you're good luck. It's like that reverse psychology.
Reverse psychology. Yeah. Hey, well, one pick I know Gamecock fans hope you are dead on will be your South Carolina pick to beat Clemson. Mike, enjoyed it as always, man. Have a good weekend and enjoy all these games. And hopefully we'll see if we're talking about a Gamecock victory after the weekend. But I appreciate you making the time, man.
No problem, guys. Hope to see you guys soon. I can't even speak. Hope to see you soon.
All right, Mike. See you, man. Of course, Mike, you've joining us here. Make sure you check out his content on Gamecock Central.